Welcome to Seekers and Shifters, where we talk to the world's foremost experts in personal growth and development and ask them everything we really want to know. Hey there, Seekers and Shifters. So today's episode is with Scott Jackson from Mandorla Spiritual Center. What a fascinating guy this dude is, man. Just wise, has lots of really interesting stuff to say. And we got into a very high level and very nerdy conversation about personal growth and development, including concepts like technological feudalism, which I had never even heard of before. So I was fascinated by Scott. I think you'll be fascinated by the conversation as well. Enjoy my conversation with Scott Jackson. Scott, do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle. Thank you for having me today. I'm grateful and honored to be here. I'm Scott Jackson, co-founder and spiritual director of Mandorla Spiritual Center in Western Montana. We're a spiritual community, a message, a place, we are a community that's built on carrying a message right now for responding to the current meta crisis and current difficulties that humanity is facing. We're actually articulating a new conversation around a story of value for humanity, which means that we actually believe that value is intrinsic within cosmos. Value is intrinsic within God and goddess, and that value actually is a thing that binds all of us as a people. And that while we're up against such existential risk right now to humanity from an ecological perspective and also from the loss of our own individual humanity driven primarily by techno feudalism. And so our mission is to bring people together, to create a conversation that moves us beyond division, beyond separation, beyond conflicts that exist between political systems, governance systems, religious systems, financial systems, and actually bring us as a species into a new place and a new story of value and a new articulation of that story of value that gives us a context for respecting and honoring our diversity and actually a way to solve our problems together. And Mandorla Spiritual Center is our expression of how we're doing that.
Oh my gosh, so many cool things to dive into here. And we were just saying right before we hit record, Scott is actually the first guest I've ever had on the show that I didn't know at all in any way beforehand, at least not not for a few minutes of introduction or something. Scott has come to us by way of our friend Sean Cecil, who was just on a few weeks ago. And I said, well, what other cool people do you know should be on the podcast? And he said, you got to talk to Scott. So that's how we got connected. I have to start by asking about techno-feudalism. I think I know what you mean, but tell us what you mean. What is techno-feudalism? Why is it a problem?
This is a really big conversation that we could turn this whole entire podcast into and probably multiple episodes, but I'll keep it simple. We're at a time where technology is evolving faster than humanity is. And the individuals or the people who are in charge of technology, AI, the creation of the internet, the way the internet is unfolding and structured, are all people who are working in a field that's completely unregulated, meaning that, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of a Skinnerian box. Well, if you remember back in high school when you read 1984, if you may have read that, where Big Brother ultimately takes over in the Ministry of Love, as it's called in the book, right? The Ministry of Love, which is really a totalitarian rule over society by influencing society to only be able to navigate through certain levers that have been installed. So this is what a Skinnerian box is. Basically, technology exists right now and is evolving in such a way. And this isn't a gloom and doom type conversation. It's just more of an awareness conversation around the potential risk of an unregulated, exponentially growing and evolving field and how it influences society, culture, the way we think, and of course, the way we behave. And so techno-feudalism is the techplex actually affecting and controlling culture, affecting and controlling what we see, how we respond, creating apps and social media platforms and a whole internet that's designed such that we can only make choices that are inside the design of the design, right? Such that we actually believe we're operating within the illusion of choice and free will, but we're more being directed unconsciously to respond to A or B, or really, really, here's kind of the real problem, to respond as A against B, right? So we're in creating more division, more separation, more conflict between people at a time when we actually need what? We need more unity. We need harmony. We need a way to actually work through our problems and have a context in which we actually can come to the table and work through our problems, not only on a cultural level, but on the global level, on the ecological level. Like, how do we actually solve the problems of humanity, the problem of the world, the problems of culture, the problems of governance, education, finance? I mean, these are all things that affect all of us, right? We're no longer, I've been around for a little while. And so I remember I came up in the Cold War, right? And like when we really lived in a global society that really well defined by borders of countries and by beliefs and values and political systems of countries. But this was pre the techplex. This was pre the internet. This was pre the information era. And now we live in a global community, a global society, but we're still acting like we're separated by borders, but we're not anymore. And we have got to come together. We have to find a way to come together to start solving our actual problems and being able to see tech for what it is, because techno feudalism is unfolding in such a way that's, in my opinion, is creating further and further separation, more and more division, more isolation, right? In a time when we're more connected than we've ever been in the history of the world, connected, air quotes, right, via technology, we're seeing epidemic numbers of depression, isolation, loneliness. And so this should tell us something, right? Like something's intrinsically wrong. Something's intrinsically wrong. And if something's intrinsically wrong, then we have to find an intrinsic solution to actually make things right.
And what's interesting about that concept of, because I agree, right? Like borders are getting less and less relevant. And obviously nations try to hold on to power. They try to hold on to the concept of borders. Some nations even limiting access to certain platforms or the entire internet to try to do that, try to control the flow of information. And so you think about, well, what's the solution? Because to your point, if there is no government, then something emerges in its place. Does technology become the government? Does AI take over humanity and become the government? What does humanity do to combat that? Is it something like a one world government, which to me is also a really scary concept? So I don't, kind of gets freaky in any direction there. I don't know what do you think?
Oh, this is really a good point. So the phrase "one world government" definitely brings up because
Oh God.
It wants to contract, right? I get it. So I like to think of it as more of what's really needed is a one world philosophy. And this is a philosophy that can be agreed upon across humanity, such that it becomes the context for our diversity to be respected and honored, such that we can solve problems. So I'll give you an example. Like I mentioned before, there's an ever-growing movement in a field, of course, of study. It's really a philosophical movement called Cosmo-erotic humanism. And Cosmo-erotic humanism, the talk track is this, the conversation is this, that's being articulated right now across really all over the world. Small little groups are starting to have this conversation and move this conversation back and forth, is that what is the one world philosophy that actually brings us together? Well, here is a viable response. First, let's talk about the problem before I tell you the actual solution. So where are we right now as a species in our evolution? Because this is a big part of what I've been doing over the years, is actually working on my own evolution of consciousness and supporting the evolution of consciousness of all the individuals I've worked with individually and in groups and in trainings and speaking and so forth. Like, it's been our focus in some capacity for 20 years. But what we're dealing with right now, or where are we in the evolutionary kind of linear line of humanity in our history, is we're in this period called postmodernity. And what's the general storyline in postmodernity is, and the real problem in postmodernity, one of the problems, not that there's all problems, but there's a major problem, in that postmodernity has deconstructed value. And so part of the existential risk we face in the world right now are the result of the deconstruction of value inside of culture. And what does that deconstruction look and sound like? Well, it sounds like this, that value is actually not real, that it's all subjective. That means out of 8 billion people on the planet, Everyone has their own subjective internal relationship to value. So therefore, it's an internal made up story. It's nonsensical and it has no validity in what's real. Now, pre-modernity had religious value. Modernity had the value of science. Post-modernity says, nope, there's no value at all. Now, here's the problem with no value. And if we believe it as a culture, which culture does believe it right now, it's displayed in what's happening globally in all of our separation and kind of the emotional difficulties I talked about, warring political, ideological, religious systems are all reflective of this right now, is that there's nothing that binds us. There's nothing to connect us. If we don't have intrinsic value, then there's nothing that's going to bind us together or connect us or enable us to actually have a story or a one world philosophy that actually allows us to come to the table together to resolve conflicts and solve problems. So what is the solution? Well, in Cosmo-erotic humanism, we believe the solution is articulating a new story of value for humanity. So, and what we believe is that truly believe like that value is intrinsic in cosmos. And what does that mean? That all of reality, all of the universe, the multiverse, everything, that all of space, time, matter is intrinsically imbued with value. Values such as eros or love, right? Allurement, desire, attention, relationships, and more. That these values are intrinsic within cosmos and in the evolutionary chain of creation from the Big Bang to matter, to life, to human reflective mind, that value is all the way up and all the way down the evolutionary chain from subatomic particles to the most highly expressed evolution of consciousness, which is human reflective mind. And if we can agree that value is intrinsic in cosmos, and I'm not talking about our subjective personal values, like Michelle, you may have your own values in the context of your relationship or in your life or in your business or your mission, right? Those are your values and they're important and they're precious, but we're not talking about our personal values. We're talking about value is real. And value exists within cosmos all the way up and all the way down in every single aspect of creation. Like I said, from subatomic particles to the greatest expression of consciousness, which is human reflective mind and all of its stages of development, right? That value is real. And so if we believe this, then we have to articulate a new grammar of value, which means we articulate a new conversation, which is exactly what I'm doing right now, right? Which is exactly what Dr. Mark Gaffney and the One Mountain, Many Paths team's doing, exactly what Zach Stein's doing, Ken Wilber's doing. I mean, there are a lot, and that's just to name a few, but there are a lot of individuals out there who are now agreeing that we have to create a new story of value. Because if the current story is that there is no value, then look around at what that's done to reality. What has that done to culture? Like we can, if we really plug in and connect to the world right now, if you really like settle into it, you can feel that something's wrong, right? You can feel that, yeah, we got some things that are really not working in our world. And this is coming from me, is it not at all a political position of left or right or center. It is literally a position that I would like to think takes a higher perspective than all of the existing diametrically opposed positions and wants to transcend and include those, hold those with reverence and respect, but also say, hey, we have to come together in articulating a new story of value, the creation of a new grammar of value, which is really meaning we're creating a new conversation that looks and sounds like a one world philosophy. And from that philosophy, see that the context then is created such that our diversity is now respected, right? When we have this context that, hey, like if no matter whether you're Muslim or Hindu or Christian or Jew or atheist, or no matter what, right? If we can all agree that value is intrinsic within cosmos all the way up and all the way down, then it becomes a context that respects our diversity and allows us to come to the table and start solving our problems together. I know that was a long response to your question, but there you go.
It was, and I mean, it's fascinating. The idea of a one world philosophy also begs the question of how do you get 8 billion people to align with the same philosophy? You know, one of my favorite books, and maybe you've read this as well, but just one of the books that changed the way I thought about a lot of things is Sapiens. In Sapiens, he talks about how humanity started to evolve when larger and larger groups of people could start to work together. At first, it's just at the tribal level, and then the tribes are warring, and then as you know, things are invented like spoken language, written language, money. of these systems that we've invented that help more and more people cooperate, to the point that now 8 billion people can live on the earth, not in perfect harmony at all. Obviously, there's lots of stuff going on. Even as we record, there's lots of war going on. And just the fact that like this planet can support that society on that level is kind of amazing. And it's a testament to human ingenuity and to technology and to human advancement that we've been able to create systems that support that. Having said that, it's mind blowing to me to think that we could come up with something that we could get everybody to buy into, to the extent that we could band together, unless there was some kind of common enemy. You know, I don't know if you know this, Scott, but I come from politics. I made that sound like it's its own country. It kind of is. I come from, my background is in the political industry. And of course, one of the basic tenets is if we want people to band together, there's got to be a common enemy. You see people on the left and the right doing that. Who's the common enemy? So we can all coalesce together. Does humanity need a common enemy? And AI is what keeps coming up, or aliens or whatever. Does humanity need a common enemy in order to be able to coalesce together and get 8 billion people on the same train, on the same philosophy?
Well, what a good question. I'm going to come back to Sapiens and Harari in a minute, and I'll respond to that.
I know you did a little eye twitch when not everybody's
for good reason. I'm actually like, you're in alignment and divine will when that shows up. And I'll explain why in a minute. But it's so fascinating that you brought up Sapiens. Anyways, I'm going to say, so in my heart, what I'm present to is no. We don't need a common enemy. Even the thinking of a common, like if I think I need an enemy, then I'm creating a position against something, right? So I think what we need is a common shared story. We need a shared story, and that shared story has to be powerful enough and moving enough to connect us together. Now, within that story, can there be the concept of an enemy or something that is dangerous, or possibly even evil, meaning completely operating without awareness, right? Like completely unconscious and out of awareness. Yeah. And for many, that can be, I think, catalytic or motivating, right? To get into action. One thing I've learned over the years is anytime I take a position, I create an opposition. And just by the virtue of creating an opposition, then we've created something that's an opposing force, right? And so I'm really careful now about what positions I take. And when I do take a position, I want that position to be one that tries to take all the perspectives into account, kind of like a higher 30, 50,000 foot view that looks at the whole landscape and holds all the positions of culture right now with a degree of respect, even if some of them are grossly off the mark, right? To hold them with respect. That's how, if we can agree that value is intrinsic in cosmos and that value is real, then that gives us the ability to respect other people's perspectives, right? This is what's so important. So people are so stuck in their positions that they can't respect other people's positions, right? It's like the left is so dug into the left, they can't respect the right, or the right's so dug into the right, they can't respect the left, and so on and so forth. And it just goes on and on and on. And, if we weren't facing existential risk that we are, like we're at an unprecedented time in the history of humanity. We've never been where we are. And so the risks that we face are unique. And as Dr. Mark and Gaffney and Zach Stein both say, they say we're at a time between worlds and a time between stories, right? This time that we're in right is so crucial to the future of humanity. So what does it take to bring 8 billion people together? It's a big number, right? I mean, what it takes is this conversation. It takes us continuing to have this conversation, to articulate it well, and to propagate it in culture such that other people start becoming aware of, well, maybe there's another way. Maybe there is a new way. Because here's the thing, if we try to do anything we've done in the past, then it's not going to work. We have to bring the wisdom, we have to discern what is the wisdom, the learning, the gifts from the past that we bring forward into the now. And then what is the new, how does that integrate with our new conversation and our forward focus to where we're going, right? So this is really important. And, we've got a bunch of data from a developmental perspective over, integral theory has done, Ken Wilber in the field of integral theory has done so much study on the development of consciousness over and what that looks like over the whole history of humanity. And we can see that new developmental levels of a consciousness that have arisen within culture globally generally happen and emerge into culture and stay when about 20% of the people actually are in agreement with the thinking and the values and the conversation of that level of emergence. So, and that's an approximation of a number, right? So we can say maybe we don't need 8 billion people. We just need enough of us having this conversation such that we actually move the needle and truly emerge into a new conversation of value. Because, okay, think about this, just hypothetical. What happens when the leaders of the conflict in Israel and Palestine could have this conversation? What happens when Russia and Ukraine could have this conversation? What happens when the left and the right can have this conversation? I get to say that value that we agree that love and desire and intimacy and relationships are intrinsic within all of reality, and that these things are so important to us in our individual lives, in our communities, and the people that we serve, that these things are the things that are going to bring us to table to the people who we've been generationally in conflict with to actually start to solve our problems together. So to me, that's why we're doing what we're doing at Mandorla Spiritual Center, right? From working with the individual to the group to the podcast to the messaging, it's all to facilitate this conversation and to hopefully touch, move, and inspire individuals to want to move out of these diametrically opposed stuck positions into a higher perspective such that we can start actually solving our problems together.
Okay, so we only need 1.75. I'm not that good at math. 1.75 billion people to
approximately. Yeah.
Approximately. And because I keep wanting to put an enemy into maybe the enemy is apathy, maybe the enemy is overwhelm, maybe the enemy is nihilism, right? It's so tempting, and I get it, right? It's so tempting to just say, fuck it, nothing matters. There's no rhyme or reason to anything. Nothing really life has no meaning. And so I'm just going to seek pleasure or whatever, and just kind of enjoy my life. And then until I die, and that'll be okay. If you're, atheist, whatever, just, and then I die and everything's, who cares? Right. I think that's tempting. I see. And don't get me wrong, folks listening, I love drugs. I do. Completely sober at the moment for the year. Also love experimenting with substances to bring us into different states of consciousness, shift our awareness, just show us how easy it is to shift our reality. I'm a big fan. And right now, I think there's a big drug problem, right? You're starting to see people use a lot of substances that are just meant to shut down, numb out. And it starts to sound like some of the dystopian novels that we read in high school. Brave New World, one of my favorites. Everybody takes the soma and oh, you get stressed out? Cool. Here's a pill. Go chill out. Right. And you see more and more of that. And so it's, how do we keep, even if it's 20% of the world population, engaged, interested enough to fight against the discomfort that it requires, the personal growth requires, the discomfort, to dive headfirst into that, to start to get into the level where you can even have these types of conversations, let alone get any type of consensus.
Agreed. Well, this is why our individual development is so important. So raising awareness around spiritual, psycho-emotional development is absolutely crucial, right? That we are doing. And so where does that always begin? It begins with the self, begins with me, my own commitment to my own evolution, my own healing, my own growth, my own expansion, which for me has been going on a 22-year journey, right? And I got sober April 9th, 2003. I had brain damage, kidney damage, liver damage. I was right at death's door. And after an 18-year run with addiction to alcohol and cocaine, and that the surrender experience that happened for me when I made that beginning was the catalyzing thing that thrust me into desperation to seek for a new solution. I had to desperately seek to end the suffering that I was living in. And that was kind of my beginning, right? And thank God that was my beginning, because it turned into such a passionate pursuit for the divine, and it manifested through the recovery process in a spiritual path. And then that would ultimately lead into, as I began to see after I'd been sober for quite some time, my psycho-emotional problems really started coming to the surface. My childhood origin of issues, all the trauma of my childhood, the significant emotional events, the codependence that had been all permeated all of my relationships, and my wound with the feminine, my wound with the masculine, which are of course tied back to my mother and father. And that's, it was 2009 when I really got present to that. And so from that moment to this moment has been a continued journey of my own development on the inside, and then sharing that with people on the outside. So sadly, we have a culture that is directed towards, let's medicate the problem rather than actually heal the problem. Let's just medicate the problem rather than heal the problem. And we're at a time where more and more awareness is coming into, hey, we actually have to heal, right? You're doing this podcast, Seekers and Shifters, for what purpose, right? You want to educate, inform, heal, help, contribute to people in a positive way, right? And there's this mushrooming right now that's been going on for quite a few years of individuals in the conscious movement who are attempting to heal, expand, grow, and share that with others. This is a very, very good sign. So we continue to have that responsibility, right? To tell people that there are other ways. You don't have to just and I'm not knocking medical approaches. I'm not a doctor, nor am I saying do or don't do something. But what I am saying is this: we have years and years and years of evidence that spiritual disciplines on wisdom paths, on traditional wisdom paths that take us deep on the inside. I'm not talking about oppressive, narrow religion that controls. I'm talking about deep spirituality where we're pointed through the path of contemplation, through meditation and interior contemplation to the nature of who we truly are. So whether that be a Buddhist path, a Hindu path, a Sufi path, a Zendo path, a radical Kabbalah path, whatever it is, there's many paths into the interior. And I think it's crucial that's part when I was talking about what wisdom do we bring forward from the past into the now. This is a big part of that wisdom, right? The path to take us inside, because so much of reality right now, so much of culture is living in like a 4x6 screen in their hand. And this is actually directing our whole experience, right? And it's like we're outside living in this thing that's telling us which way we can think, what way we can't think. And we're missing the point that actually we need to turn to the inside, right? Turn to the inside. That's done through, of course, through meditation, through interior disciplines and what we would call the interior sciences. What's happened in the past 100 years from a psychological perspective, like the technologies that we currently have for psychological and emotional healing and development are absolutely profound, right? There are so many good technologies that are actually here to help us to heal and help us to take responsibility for our internal emotions, for our behaviors, and to heal those in a good way. So this is another part of our work, right? Continuing to propagate this in culture. And, if we think the number 1.75 billion, like that's daunting, that's overwhelming, that's a lot, right? But if we go, you know what, we bring it down to, I'm going to take care of myself every day with my own disciplines, my own growth, my own healing. And then I'm going to help as many people as I can, whether it's one conversation at a time, one client at a time, one small group at a time, right? And then we have enough people that are doing that together globally. Then we start moving the needle, and the needle is moving, right? I mean, it's moving right now. This conversation is a part of exactly that.
I love that you said that. It's a philosophy that I certainly share as well. And at the point where, embarrassingly or not, I spend more time every day on my own self-development than I do on any kind of like traditional work. But it makes the work that I do that much more effective, that much more impactful, that much more, the results are exponential from that. I see that in my own life. Doing something like this, to your point, I think right now we have 154 subscribers on YouTube. And I'm like, why, this is, some work. It's some money into production for this. So it's certainly not, there's certainly not an ROI on it or anywhere even close. It's just something that I'm doing because I like to do it. But also I think about that and I think, there's one person over here tells me, oh, I heard that episode. It changed the way I thought about something. It really has, I've gone down the rabbit hole and I've listened to a few of these and I'm really starting to explore these things. And it makes it worth it. Right. Just kind of what little impact you can have. I got to say, as an aside, by the way, apropos of nothing, my 11-year-old right now has a YouTube channel who has 3.3K subscribers, and he rubs it in my face every day that how many subs do you have? I'm like 150.
Look, first of all, it's awesome that he's doing what he's doing, right? Incredible. Maybe you learned some tips from him. And
he is educating me, but unfortunately my content is not aviation related. So he's not really interested in helping beyond that. I wish he were doing personal development for children. He's not.
well, maybe he will be in the near future. Look, here's my thinking. 154 is epic and awesome because it's 154 more than you had before you started what you're doing. Right. And that number has grown from 0 to 154. And in the study of practice of Taoism, right, there are two words that are kind of held as what I would call sacred. And that's commitment and discipline, And it's the suiting up and showing up every single day. And continuing to follow your heart and stay committed, even when things are the most difficult, right? Like that's the law of compound interest, right? The more it's interesting. I'm reading a book right now called The Psychology of Money. And the chapter this morning was about exactly this, right? And it's about the energy, the law of compound interest. And so with commitment and discipline, seekers and shifters, maybe 150 today, but maybe next year it's 150K, right? And so you keep at it.
There's an inflection point. James Clear, obviously one of our favorite authors of Atomic Habits. I train entrepreneurs. We talk about the power of habit, the importance of habit all the time. And he makes that point in that book, which is, these habits compound. I'm a money nerd, right? I'm an investor. Obviously, we talk about that in terms of money and interest, but it also compounds on anything else you're doing. Why that was such a profound thing for me to read at the time that I read it was because I've been on a health journey. I've been struggling with my weight in particular since COVID, like a lot of people. And this concept of, hey, you're going to go, if you can go work out every day, you can track your macros every single day. For the first 3 months, you're not going to see shit. There's a compound that's happening, but it's not super visible at the beginning. Just like I can invest my money every month, and at the beginning, it's not going to do that much. The market's going to go up and down, and why am I even doing this? Right? I can podcast every day for months, and I got 150. Why am I even doing this? Because if you keep going, at a certain point, there's an inflection point for anybody that's and I've lost weight before. I'm doing it again, but I've done it before. If you've ever been on that journey before, you know that you keep going the first 3 months, nothing happens. And then all of a sudden there's a drop. All of a sudden it starts to come in. All of a sudden you look in the mirror and you go, oh my God, I look totally different than I did a few months ago. Or you see pictures of yourself side by side and you go, oh my gosh, I didn't even notice, but look how much it changed. If you invest your money and you leave it alone, guys, especially if you're in your 40s, leave it alone. And you come back and you look at it 10 years later, you're going to, oh my God.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. And this law of compound interest is an actual law, right? It exists. Not just, we tend to make it about investment, but it's actually, just like you said, it's the energy of anything we do with this consistency and discipline over time. I mean, I started meditating. I remember when my late teacher, Mark, told me, he actually said, when we started working together, he said, what are your disciplines? I said, blah, 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 blah. And he said, well, where's meditation? And I said, I'm not meditating. And he goes, well, how do you listen to God? And I went, I don't know. And he goes, well, you're going to start meditating and you're going to start with 3 minutes a day. And he said, and the mind's going to be loud. It's going to sound like 1,000 monkeys. And so what? You're going to set a timer and you're not going to come off the meditation cushion or out of the chair until the timer goes off. And I said, yes, sir. Right? I said, I'll do that. And so I started. And then 3 minutes became 5 minutes, and 5 minutes became 7 minutes, and 7 minutes became 12 minutes, and so on and so forth. And then, for a couple of years, I was meditating for hours straight on at a time. And the experiences, the transpersonal, the transcendental states, right? The altered states and the experiences I had that moved me into true experience of the field of value that I've been talking about, true experience of bliss, of love, without any plant medicines or anything like that, just through the discipline of consistency of meditation over time, had me transcend. And this is the wisdom and the data that we have from thousands of years of practice, is that if we practice these disciplines over and over time, we will transcend the personal separate self into union with the true self. And from this place of union with the true self, we can truly know, like not just lowercase k with our mind, but know with a capital K from a wisdom perspective, an interior perspective, that love truly is all there is. And that all of reality is based in this fundamental intrinsic value, and cosmos has always been here and always will be. But we got to find it, right? And we find it by going to the inside. We move from concept to practice to discipline to experience.
Absolutely. And I want to just break something out here for our listeners on that, which is the concept of discipline as love, right? We think about discipline, and maybe that calls to mind times when you were a kid and you were, I know you're of an age too where you were probably actually spanked with with implements. Like I
would call it spanked. Other people would call it abuse. But
call it abuse, call it beating. My mom might listen to this, so we're not going to go into like the trauma. We were, and everybody was spanked, beaten, whatever, with belts, with paddles, with implements. That was normal. And so the concept of discipline is like, oh my God, it can be triggering. It can be scary. Discipline, you even think about self-discipline. It doesn't feel like something fun. It's like, oh, self-discipline, yes, I'm sober. Yes, I eat clean. Yes, I work out almost every day. There's a lot of self-discipline into that. But why? I study some of the ancient Hawaiian philosophy, and in that philosophy, the concept of discipline as love is very present, right?
Are you talking about Huna by any chance?
Talking about Huna? Yeah, absolutely. Talking about Huna. Don't Google Huna, you'll get some bullshit. Yeah. Ancient philosophies in Hawaii, just like in all other parts of the world, that kind of came together, right? But in this concept of discipline is, first, I love myself, right? If I'm disciplining my children, right, from a pure intention, out of love for them, out of creating a structure for themselves, structure is love.
100%.
This is why love arises from discipline. What do you think about that, Scott?
Well, I love it. This is beautiful. So first up, you made a great distinction, because some people have what I would call from the world of NLP is a negative internal representation to discipline, right? So a negative interior relationship to that, because it brings up being disciplined in some form of a punitive way. So that's one meaning, but we take that and move it aside and we bring it into a different context, which is the development of the self, right? And so I use the word discipline because discipline means these are my practices. Like I get up every morning, I meditate, I drink water, I read, I actually do brain training. Like these are all different disciplines I do that continue the evolution of my own self, right? So discipline to me has a very endearing and meaningful relationship. But we've also, so then for some, it's like, if you can't just tolerate that word, then it's like, what word can you tolerate, right? Like maybe it's practices or spiritual practices or spiritual disciplines or, self-love disciplines, whatever it may be. And these are all acts of love. Even if we don't know ourselves through love yet, even if we don't, oftentimes when we begin our path, many of us don't have a relationship yet to truly loving ourselves, right? Like we're still carrying the shame and the guilt and the significant events of our childhood, the conditioning, the traumas, the beliefs like I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy, or, all of the things that we tend to go through and create with ourselves. And so it can be hard to believe when somebody says, hey, you're worthy of love and you will love yourself with your whole heart at some point. Some people would be like, hell no, there's no way I can even relate to that, right? But in the structure and the consistency of doing disciplines that cultivate the self, that actually, really what I mean by cultivate the self is we start to burn away the falseness of who we're not to find the trueness and the essence of who we are. And in that, we begin to truly love ourselves. In 18 years of alcoholism and drug addiction, I did horrible things to myself and to other human beings. Where I would ultimately go was beyond anything I ever said I would never do. I crossed all those lines. The amount of shame and guilt that when I started to get sober, that finally would kind of land on me was literally unbearable. It seemed unbearable. It was so big. And then I didn't have alcohol and drugs anymore to turn into, to not feel that guilt and shame. So I had to move forward, right? Like that saying, the way out is through. And so it was literally, if it wouldn't have been for my daily disciplines of prayer and meditation and reading and going to meeting and reading, and I mean like spiritual texts, things that actually were supporting me in my journey at that point, going into the meetings, which was being in the community that I needed to be in and starting to serve in that community, I would have never made it through. I would have gone back to drinking and drugging, and I'm sure I would have died. But it was that daily discipline that actually just every day, it was like, I get up and I would literally get on my knees every morning and I would say a simple prayer. I'd say, God, please help me today to stay sober and to make it through this day and to do the best job that I can. It was very simple in the beginning. And at the end of the day, I would say, thank you. And I would mean it, right? Like, thank you for getting me through this day. And then that turned into another day and another day, then months and years and so on and so forth, right? And then what started to happen was I started to forgive myself through my own work, through the step work, and then through psychological and emotional healing work. And then, of course, getting in the field of NLP and timeline therapy and some other things that I've done and taught over the years, I began to really make peace with myself, to forgive myself. I went out and cleaned up the wreckage of the harm that I created when I lived that way. And I started to fall in love with myself. And I don't mean in some like shadowy, egotistical, unconscious, hedonistic way. I mean, like, no, like what happened was as I began to move into a relationship with the divine, I realized that the divine truly loved me, that I had been loved and held throughout my whole entire life, no matter what horror, no matter what difficulty, what abuse, what trauma, what I had been through, or what I had done to others, that I had been loved. And what I started to really question was like, wow, if this divinity that I call God and Goddess loves me unconditionally, who am I to not love myself? What an egoic expression of separation for me not to love myself when the divine loves me, period. And then we start to cultivate a relationship with ourselves that's not a conditional loving relationship, but it's a divinely loving relationship. And this doesn't absolve me or us of our responsibility to our behaviors. No, it actually has us deal with our behaviors and our negative behavior specifically and our shadow expressions with a more conscious, intentional way where we start bringing those into the light to deal with them, right? To actually deal with my wounds, my behaviors, my anger, my fear, all of the things that actually have me be separate, actually start being when I can start to love myself for all of myself. And I say this to people often, right? Yeah, it's really easy to love yourself when you're doing great, but can you love yourself when your greatest warts are on display? In my belief, it's really, really valuable for us to take the things that we don't like about ourselves, right? The behaviors or the ways of feeling or acting that cause us some degree of concern or maybe even self-judgment, and to look at those things from more of an objective perspective rather than subjective, meaning we actually turn subject into object and we look at what am I actually behaving this way for? What's the root of why I continue to have this reactive pattern in my relationship with this woman that I love? Where is this rooted in? Oh, wow. It's actually, this has happened to me over and over. Wow, this is exactly the way my dad treated my mom. Oh, so I learned it. Okay. And I've learned it really well. Now, what do I have to do to unlearn it? Right.
Oh, so beautifully said. And what a wise man. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's really been an honor. Brand new friend. Hopefully we could call each other friends now.
I hope so.
If people want to find you, because I know you guys are about to launch some new big stuff over there, right? So if people want to find you, they want to follow you, where should they go to learn more?
Well, okay, great. Thanks for asking. Go to, there's a couple places. You can follow us on Instagram at Mandorla Spiritual Center. You can and get us online at mandorlaspiritualcenter.org. We have a weekly wisdom newsletter that goes out. And so you can sign up there and get that, whether it be we do text and video and different ways of just sharing our weekly wisdom. We also have the podcast that is launching next week, which is Mandorla Spiritual Center podcast. Will be on YouTube and on all of the podcasting platforms. So those are the easiest ways to get connected to us and to start being a part of the conversation with us and following along as we go on this journey together.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate you being on. We'll have to have you back because there's so many things that we can dive into, like you said.
Well, we do got to come back because we still got the open loop on Sapiens, and I trust them.
We like open loops.
Well, really present to the open loop on Sapiens, and so we should come back and have another conversation because it's an important part of the conversation.
We'll do an entire hour just on Sapiens. We can fight it out. We can do kind of point counterpoint on it. Thanks so much, Scott, and everybody else.
You're welcome. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.